Well, hi folks, and welcome to my first ever Let's Play for the game V for Victory D-Day Utah Beach by Atomic Games. Now, just to let you know, I'm actually going to focus in on one of the short scenarios called Mopping Up for this series. And this is because I want to use this series to kind of go through the gameplay and game mechanics and do some explanation through this short series of videos before I then move on to actually do a much longer series of videos covering the campaign game for this game. Anyway, so moving on with some explanations. So the scenario, as I say, I'm going to be playing is called Mopping Up. Atomic suggests that this will last around 1 hour, though I found these links to be a little bit optimistic, and also because I'm going to be doing some explanations throughout, and in particular at the beginning of this video, it's going to take me a lot longer than 1 hour. So I'm actually going to break the videos down into about 45-minute sessions, and so I'm kind of expecting there to be 2 to maybe 3 episodes. Well, hopefully that will be sufficient. So anyway, this particular scenario runs through from June 29th through to July the 2nd. So it's just a 4-day period. And as it says here, Cherbourg has been liberated, but a large German force is still dug in on the northwestern tip of the peninsula. As commander of the 9th Infantry Division, your mission is to clean out this last pocket of German resistance as quickly as possible. We're actually focusing on this area of the Cotentin Peninsula, and this area I believe is called Cap de la Hague or Hague. I'm not exactly sure how you pronounce it. Utah Beach is down here, and Cherbourg is up here. Now we are playing, as it says there, with the 9th Infantry Division, and the 9th Infantry Division were actually classified to be one of the best infantry divisions in the US Army. They were extremely experienced, having had a lot of action in North Africa as well as Sicily, and then moved to England in November, I think 1943, to prepare for Operation Overlord for D-Day. So they actually landed at Utah Beach, I think over a 3-day period from around the 10th to the 12th of June. So they started landing 4 days after D-Day. But they were pushed into action very quickly, being one of the best divisions, obviously. And they were actually tasked with moving west. And they were one of the main divisions, along with others, that headed west to ultimately take Carteret over here, which was the objective to isolate the peninsula so that German reinforcements from the south couldn't get up and reinforce the German forces that were therefore trapped up here. So once the 9th got over to this point, this area, they moved on up, clearing the west side of the peninsula until they got to the west side of Cherbourg. And then they were the western thrust of a 3-division attack on Cherbourg. And Cherbourg was finally liberated on the 27th of June. So it's a couple of days before this scenario starts. So I'm guessing that the 9th Infantry Division got a day or two's rest before being tasked with clearing this area. So we are going to just have a quick look at the settings I've got in this scenario. So if we go to air superiority, we've got total allied air superiority, which is the historical setting, and I want to go for as much historical accuracy with the settings as possible, so we will leave that at the default. Under weather, we've got historical, so we're just going to leave the weather for those days the same as they were in reality. And under realism, we've got the 3 realism options turned on. And these are limited intelligence, which kind of is just like an indication of how much intelligence you have on your enemy units. So it's limited. So obviously until you've actually had some contact and engagement with the enemy units, you really don't know much, if anything, about them. So that kind of means that you won't see a lot of the German units until your units get close to them. And once you've been engaging them, then you'll start to gather more information and intelligence about them. But while you don't know much about them and you're attacking, it means that the odds for your attacks that are being displayed can be extremely inaccurate. So you have to bear that in mind when making your attacks. 1 division per attack. Now this really only applies when you've got multiple divisions in a scenario. In this scenario, we've only got the 9th Infantry Division, so this has no effect in this scenario, but ordinarily if you're in one of the scenarios with multiple divisions, it means that any one attack can only involve units from a single division. If you try and assign a unit from another division to that attack, the game will not let you. And the final one is Fog of War, and this is just representative of the fact that you don't always have accurate information about your own units. With the chaos of battle, communication breaks down and you don't always know exactly what casualties you've been taking until reports have been compiled and sent back to divisional or corps HQs. So Fog of War means that you may not know exactly what your combat values and unit statuses really are. I believe I read somewhere that this can have a plus or minus 25% effect on your unit status values, but I'm not sure whether that is exactly right or not. Anyway, for an opponent, we're going to be playing against the computer AI, and we're obviously going to be playing as the allies. So let's get the game started. So here we are. It's 6 a.m. on the 29th of June. And each game turn is 4 hours long, so you've got 6 turns per day. And we're starting off at the 6 a.m. game turn. And at the 6 a.m. game turn every day, you have the opportunity where you get prompted with this message. So you have the opportunity to attach units to other HQs, to alter your HQ supply levels, and to allocate ground support aircraft. Now in this case, attaching units to other HQs, we only have the 9th Infantry Division HQ down here. There are no other HQs in this scenario, so we cannot attach units to other HQs. But we will be going ahead and altering the HQ supply levels, and we will be allocating ground support aircraft, and I'll do those things right now. So we click on the HQ piece there. Now ordinarily if you have multiple HQs, you would select them by using those arrow keys, but we've only got the 9th. The supply section is down here. And you can see this shows you how many tons of supply will be consumed over the day, and this is the stockpile that is available. So you can see we've got over a day's worth of supply still available there if we are in defensive supply. Now let me just click on a unit down here. You really don't want to be in defensive supply when obviously what we're going to be doing here is going on the offensive. And being in defensive supply actually reduces our combat strength for all of these units. So for instance here, the normal strength of this unit is 9. This is the 1st Battalion of the 60th Infantry Regiment. But the actual combat strength or attack strength is 5. And when in defensive supply, you actually lose half of your combat strength. And also just to let you know, when in defensive supply, this coloured bar over here is orange. Now, this coloured bar is broken into 2 pieces. The left-hand piece represents the current HQ supply level for the unit, for the HQ that unit is attached to. I'll come on to the right-hand portion in a little while once we actually start playing the game. What we want to do is we would ideally want to push this supply level up to at least general. Now general supply puts our combat strength up to its normal value. So all of these units are basically receiving sufficient supply to go about normal operations, normal attack offensive operations. And we've still got a fair amount of stockpile available, but that looks like it's much less now. As you can see, that's the daily requirement to be in general supply. That's much less than a daily requirement in our stockpile. Now, ordinarily, if you have sufficient stockpile available, you could click on this once more and go into attack supply. But if I click on it once more, we can't because we don't have sufficient stockpile, so it's actually cycled back down to the other end of things, which is minimal supply. And you can see down here how our combat strength has dramatically reduced. So if I put it back to defensive and then general, that's where we want to be, because that's the highest supply level, and that will allow these units to have the highest combat strength they can have for this offensive based on the supply that is available to them. Now if I just click back on that 60th the 60th Infantry Regiment Battalion here, you can see that colour bar has now changed to blue. So you just kind of have to remember what the colours represent. If it's green, then it's actually attack supply. blue is general supply, orange is defensive, red is minimal, and black is none. And black only occurs if you're out of supply. That is, if you have become isolated from any supply line, that you have no supply route back to your HQ. And actually I'll mention the supply routes now. It's probably the right time to do it rather than when I'm playing the game. Whenever you click on a unit, you can actually see a coloured line flashing briefly that goes back to the HQ, and you can see that because I've got it turned on in the options, where you've got up here show supply lines. That little diamond at the left is filled in, which means it's turned on. If I was just to move my cursor over that and let go, you can see it's now an unfilled little diamond. That means it's turned off. So when I click on these units, that little coloured line no longer shows up. That coloured line is essential and really useful, so I highly recommend you leave that on. So when you click on that, it shows you a coloured line, and that is the same as this right hand portion here. This right hand portion is essentially the supply level that you are actually receiving from your HQ, whether you are in supply or not, or whether you're having supply difficulties. When it's green, it means you will receive the full amount of supply that is being allocated by your HQ. So in this case, because that's green, that means we will get general supply. We will receive all of the general supply that's being sent to us. Now, if you are too far away from your HQ, then if you go a certain distance, then you will actually drop down one supply level, and that green line will turn blue. And that means you are now operating at one level below what the HQ allocated supply level is. So in this case, we've got blue here, which means we're being allocated general. But if this was blue, then we would drop down a level. And one level down from general is defensive. So that would mean we would start losing combat efficiency and combat strength. And you also start to lose movement allowance as well. If you go even further away from your HQ, then you may actually drop down 2 levels below what your HQ allocation is. So that would then, this green section here would then be orange. And if you were even further away, it would go red. And each time that color goes down, you drop down a level below your allocated supply level from your HQ here. But bear in mind, it can't go down below minimal. You can't go out of supply for having too long a supply line. You can only go out of supply if your supply line is cut by enemy units. Anyway, that's enough about supply. So we've allocated supply. We want that back up at general. Let's make sure I leave it on general before we go ahead. And you can see, clicking on any of these units, we've still got blue down here. Now if I click on the orders button down here, you can see that there are 3 sections to this panel. Now the first section is something that allows you to have the AI move idle, non-artillery and or non-engaged units to basically automatically plot movement paths back towards their HQs. And I guess this is if you've got an extremely complicated multi-divisional battlefield, units have all become interdispersed amongst each other, and you want to start basically peeling those units back towards their respective divisions. So that's probably very, very useful in the campaign game. The next piece is whether to accept staff orders. Now, staff orders is where you can have the AI take some of the load off and do movement, attacks, or whatever for you. And this is also more finely tuned in the staff duties menu item at the top here, in which case you can turn on any one of these items. You can have the AI handle the allocation of supplies, which is the definition of the HQ supply level there. Whether you're going to want it to allocate artillery fire support, whether to use the Air Force, plot ground units, handle night moves. I've got all of those turned off because I want to do everything myself. You can also turn on handle all operations, in which case you can have the AI play itself, in which case that can be quite entertaining. So anyway, so we're going to leave all those turned off. So even though these are ticked down here, they'll have no effect because I've turned them off up here. There's also a replacements section down here. Now, as units lose combat strength and take casualties, you can pull them off the front line and assign replacements to them. Now, we've got replacements for infantry engineer units, the HQ, which is kind of odd because we hopefully will not have the HQ involved in combat. So that's probably going to be useless. And we've also got one replacement available for airborne units. Now, it's odd as well because in this scenario, we have no airborne units. There were obviously airborne units involved in Utah Beach. You had the 82nd Airborne Division and also the 101st Airborne Division. And they were both heavily involved in Utah Beach and here on the Cotentin Peninsula. But in this particular scenario, there are no airborne units. So that's a useless replacement point. These numbers may increase through the scenario. Certainly in the campaign game, you may have replacements assigned, a certain number per turn, per day. And so that's very specific to the individual game and the individual scenario. Now, if you do use replacements, it does reduce your victory points. And victory points is what the game is all about. Oh, click on the right button. So if you click on the victory button here, you accumulate victory points, and you can also have reductions to your victory points. And for instance, here in the replacements box, it will show you the reduction in replacement points due to you using replacements on units. Now, the victory point reduction for replacements is pretty minimal. So if I feel that a unit really has lost combat strength through casualties, then I will use replacements. I'm not going to fuss too much about loss of victory points on that. Now, ships aren't available in this scenario. They are in the campaign game as some of the other scenarios, but they also have a victory point loss associated with them, and that is shown and accumulated in this box here. Next thing is to allocate ground support aircraft. Now, this represents the US AAF, 9th Air Force, and we'll allocate that by clicking on the calendar here, and then we get this larger calendar pops up, and you can see, so we've got 4 days here. We're on the 29th of June here, 30th, the 1st of July, and the 2nd of July. And when you click on any one of these, you get the weather forecast. And you can see over the 6 turns for each day. So we are currently in the first daylight turn here, and the forecast is bright and sunny all day long, which is exactly what we want for ground support aircraft. However, if we move forward, we can see that the weather really starts to deteriorate, and we actually don't have a good forecast for the 1st or the 2nd of July. And as we move forward in the game, these areas will populate. What it is you don't have like the hourly or 4-hourly forecast once you go into this too far ahead, 2 days ahead. But if you are 1 day ahead, you do get the 4-hourly forecast. But you do get a general forecast for those days, and so it's looking like the 1st and 2nd of July are going to be pretty cloudy, and so the likelihood of getting ground support aircraft is pretty minimal. So we want to use as much as we can, certainly in this first day. Now, you can allocate ground support aircraft by clicking on the little aircraft icon here, and you have this little box here, which is the key thing to look at. This says probable ground support missions each turn. And what this means is at the moment, we've got 4 daylight turns. You can only have ground support aircraft during daylight turns. And the chances are that we could only have 1 support mission occurring each turn. And the reason it's probable is because although the US Army would make requests to the 9th Air Force for ground support, the aircraft were not always available, or the weather was so bad that they couldn't actually launch those attacks. So what you have here is an indication that you're really not going to get much ground air support the way it's set up at the moment. Now, this number down here is affected by 2 things. First of all, it's affected by this area over here on the left, the interdiction of enemy men and supplies. Now, this is something that just goes on in the background. you really have no control other than setting the level here. So if I put this up to maximum, you can see that we no longer have any ground support missions available at all. And now what this is doing is this is saying that all of the 9th Air Force, any aircraft that they have available will be used to interdict behind enemy lines and try and reduce supply to the enemy units. And that's going to do that. That's going to use as many aircraft that they have as possible. And this is all handled behind the scenes. You don't see how much supply effect is achieved or how much interdiction is achieved. You have no indication of that whatsoever, other than the fact that you lose your ground support aircraft missions. You can put this down to minimal, and you can see that now this has gone from what we had 1 when it was on moderate to 3. Which means that the aircraft that were being allocated behind the scenes to interdiction are now available for specific ground support missions, and you can use these in individual attacks on the enemy units. Now, I did say earlier I want to set this to be as realistic as possible in terms of using the historical settings, and according to the manual and Atomic Games, this is achieved by the default moderate setting. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave that there. However, this doesn't look very good, does it? 1 possible ground support mission per turn. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn off ground air support for this first 4-hour turn. And that's because, if we just go back to the map, none of these units are next to any enemy units. So I can't do any ground attacks in the first turn. And so there's little point in allocating aircraft support for ground attacks that aren't occurring. So I'm actually just going to turn that off. And the reason for that is because this has now increased to 2. So I've now got a possibility of up to 6, 2, 4, 6 total ground support missions over this entire day, compared to what I had before, which was a total of 4 total ground support missions per day. So turning that off seems to, the way it comes across to me anyway, is that I may get more ground support missions by doing that. And as this is the best weather, I certainly want to keep ground support available on all of those turns, because in subsequent days we're going to lose any chance of using aircraft. Okay, so now let's move on to just have a quick look at the game options I've got set up here. So you have a number of game options. You have the close view and the non-close view, funnily enough. Unfortunately, there are only 2 zoom levels in this game. So if I now left click on that, or let go of my mouse button on that, then we end up in this zoomed out view. And if you're playing the campaign game, you can actually, you'll see the whole of the peninsula and you can move around this. And you get the kind of, I guess, the funny graphic symbol for each one of these units, whether they're kind of infantry, artillery, or motorized armor type deals. But when we're playing the game, obviously in the close view, this is where you'll spend most of your time. That expanded view will be very useful in the campaign game where you've got a very large front going on. I've already spoken about turning on and off the supply lines. You can also turn on and off hex ownership. Now I'll just turn that off, and you can see we've got no indication now of essentially where the front line is and who owns what hex. Now that is very useful to know, so I'm going to leave that turned on, and you can see that the enemy owned hexes are darker than normal. We also have show hex borders. I'll just bring that up briefly. Personally, I like to kind of hide those. The hexes are pretty obvious without that anyway, and I think it makes the map look a little bit more, I don't know, a bit more realistic. Not that it's realistic at all, but kind of realistic, more realistic. Anyway, military symbols, you can turn those on and off. So we can either have the kind of standard kind of cartoony type graphic, or you can have the kind of standard NATO symbols, and I like the NATO symbols, so I'll be playing with those. We can turn on and off. Oh, we can have center map on battles, and we'll have that turned on. So every time there's a battle during the execution phase, the map will move to that, and you'll see that on screen. Sound effects will have on, help messages on, arrival notifications are on, but that's only relevant if you've got reinforcements landing at Utah Beach in this game. But that's about reinforcement arrival notifications. So you'll get a message, will pop up on screen to say that there are reinforcements available, and then you would move to the reinforcement location, and then you can move them from there. But as I say, in this scenario, we don't have any reinforcements. And then we've got various battle reports, and I want to see all of the battle reports as they occur. Okay, next thing I just want to mention is that I am actually playing with the very latest version, or the final version, I should say, of V for Victory. So that's this is the version that came with the very last release of the games, which was the V for Victory Commemorative Collection. So it was all 4 games in one box on a CD. And this was has the master program of 4.01, although the last one isn't shown there. And it is actually Utah Beach scenario and data file versions 3.1, although that's shown as 3.0 there. So it's the latest version of the game. The final thing I want to do just before we actually start with the actual battle itself is just do a very quick review of the forces that we have involved. It's very important to obviously to know what forces you have so that you can use them appropriately. Now this is the 9th Infantry Division, but we also have a number of additional units that have been attached from the 7th Corps to this division. And the 7th Corps had a whole host of kind of independent battalions that they would assign to divisions as and when they felt necessary. So in this particular case, we have been assigned the 4th Mechanized Reconnaissance Battalion here, and you can tell it's from the 7th Corps. It's been reassigned is because it's got the 7th Corps number there. We also have, and that's actually I should just mention, that's a very strong unit. You can see there's got a current attack strength of 10. If we actually press on the Ops panel here, then it tells us what the unmodified defense strength is, which is 8. And it says down here that the normal strength of this unit is 10, which means that although this has been assigned to us, it has actually been subjected to casualties, and it's at 80% of its full strength. So it's not full strength, but still pretty strong. And there's no disruption or fatigue, so it's been well rested and reorganized. Okay, so now moving on to the next 7th Corps item, we have the 746th Tank Battalion here. Which is a pretty good unit to have. And again, that's a little bit under strength. It's got a defense strength of 3 here, an unmodified strength of 3, and its normal is 4. So this is at around 75% strength. And we've also got the 899th Tank Destroyer Battalion. And again, this is around 75% of its normal full strength. We also have 2 artillery, field artillery battalions. We've got I think this is one, yeah, the 951st Field Artillery Battalion, and we also have the 172nd Field Artillery Battalion. Now, the 172nd is pretty useful in this scenario because it has the maximum range. All of the other artillery battalions have their complement of guns are actually howitzers, and they are depends on the unit, but they are either 105mm or 155mm howitzers. So these have a range of either 10 or 14 hexes, as in kilometers, because each hex is 1 kilometer. Whereas the 172nd has a range of 18, and it's got a range of 18 because they're actually guns, they're not howitzers, and guns have a larger range typically than howitzers. And these are 4.5-inch guns. Moving on to the actual 9th Division, the units that are normally make up part of the 9th Division, we actually have 3 infantry regiments. We've got the 47th, which is made up of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd battalions. And you can tell which battalion it is because there's a little black dot in the bottom left. So that's 1 dot for the 1st battalion, 2 dots for the 2nd, 3 for the 3rd. So that's the 47th Infantry Regiment. And if you look at the combat strength of these, they have a combat strength of 9, and they are at 100% strength, and again well rested and reorganized. So that's a pretty strong grouping there. We've also got the 39th infantry regiment made up of these 3 battalions, again same strengths, and we've also got the 60th infantry regiment made up of these 3 battalions, and again all at full strength. So they are our main force, attack force, and these are our units with the greatest strength basically. On top of that we have a combat engineer battalion here. This is the 15th combat engineer battalion, and we'll use this when we are attacking some of the fortified positions because it does give an odds bonus having an engineer unit involved in those attacks. And the fortified positions are, you can see, but these are the bunkers, and you can see that these coastal artillery units, these enemy coastal artillery units, are heavily fortified, and so using an engineer unit in some of these attacks will be of benefit. So we'll be using that for those. And what else do we have? We have down here, we have another mechanized reconnaissance unit. So remember, we've got the 4th mechanized reconnaissance battalion here on loan from 7th Corps. We've got a 9th mechanized reconnaissance unit down here, but this is a company. It's a much smaller unit, and you can tell it's a company because there's a black slash in the bottom right hand corner, and you can see there that the combat strength of this unit is very low. Its normal is 2, and its current value is 1. So this is also, it's not only is it a small company unit, but it's at half strength. So we really probably won't be using this in any combat. We'll be using this to explore some of the enemy terrain. Have I missed anybody? Dink, dink, dink. I don't think I have. Yeah, and also obviously we've got the 9th HQ itself, which, you know, understandably has no attack strength, but it does have a fairly significant defense strength assigned to it, and that is at full strength itself. Okay, so I think we are ready to actually get on with some attacks, and I apologize about how long that preliminary introduction has taken, but I won't repeat myself, hopefully. If I do, you can complain in the comment section below. So I'm actually going to take 3 different approaches up here, maybe 4. We'll see. The first is I am going to use the 4th Mech Recon here to rush Vauville. These are our victory locations, and there are a lot of points at stake with each one of these victory locations, and currently they're all held obviously by the Germans. We want to get some American flags in these. In fact, the objective of this scenario is to get American flags in all of them. So I'm actually going to rush Vauville because although I don't know what's in here, I'm suspecting that there won't be anything down here, and the reason is because there are no fortifications, and it's not particularly good defensive terrain. So I suspect that the units will be, you know, buried. Any units that are in this area will be in this bocage area here. Now, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, well, we'll try it with tactical movement. Now there are 2 different movement types. I should backtrack slightly. You've got auto movement, in which case you can turn it to auto movement, click on a hex, and it will try and plot a path. Now clearly you can see that this can be very poorly done, because why on earth would you send a unit up here that's going straight to an enemy unit when you want to try and rush Vauville? It's obviously trying to use the roads as much as possible, so it's just trying to minimize the amount of movement points that are being used. It's also using strategic movement. Now strategic movement is when you're essentially just moving towards the front line. You know, you're in your rear areas, it's safe. Caution is not necessary while you are moving, so it allows you to move quickly and a far greater distance when you're in that mode. The problem is if you move a unit via strategic movement and it passes into a zone of control, as in it moves next to an enemy unit, and you may not see that enemy unit until it happens, then in the execution phase that an ambush could occur. And I've seen ambushes do, you know, generally they don't, they often don't do much in terms of damage, but I have seen up to 30 to 40% damage done depending on the unit ambushing and the unit being ambushed. So you do not want to be ambushed if you can avoid it. So you would then want to use tactical movement. Now, tactical movement is obviously where you are the unit is moving with far greater caution. It's looking out for enemy units, and they are combat ready. So if you do use tactical movement and you stumble into a zone of control and find an enemy unit, the enemy unit doesn't have an opportunity to ambush you because you are ready and prepared. And if they did try to ambush you, you are ready and to defend yourselves. So ambushes don't occur in this game under those circumstances. So, but the problem with tactical movement, because you're moving far more cautiously and slowly, your movement points that you use each time you move is far greater, so you can move less distance than you can relative to strategic movement. Okay, so let's just try doing tactical movement to get to Vorville. And we can. Perfect. So I'm going to rush Vorville in a very tactical way. So that looks good. Next up, I'm actually going to use tactical movement to move this mech recon, because I want to start to explore this area and just see if there are any units here that could harass our flanks. Now I'm just going to go that far, although yeah, there's a cross has come up, which means I can't move any further anyway. So I'm just going to move to there, and we'll see if we come across anything. Now I'll come back to this central section in a minute. We'll go over to this northern section. Now I'm going to assign the 47th Infantry Regiment to attack this coastal artillery battery. And you can see these are just company-sized units. These are pretty small units. We really don't have any information yet about what their strength is in terms of their defense strength. Their morale's pretty good, up at 7, but we know they're relatively small units. So a regiment should be absolutely oodles to take these out. So I'm going to assign the 47th to that one. Now for this coastal artillery unit, I'm actually going to assign the 39th. Now the problem is the 39th is very far away. And if I kind of just let the auto plot go that distance, it's defaulted to strategic movement. And as I mentioned before, if I was to let it do that, as soon as the unit moves into here, it's possibly going to be subject to an ambush. And I do not want to throw away combat strength unnecessarily. So I'm actually going to strategically move to 1 hex away. So I'm going to move 2 battalions there, and I'm going to move the 3rd battalion there. So next turn, I'll move them up. So they won't be able to attack next turn. They'll have to attack the turn after. I'm also going to use the engineer battalion in the attack against that. Where did I move the 2? 39, so they're both going to that side. So I actually want to move the engineer unit to this side. So my plan is I'm going to have 2 battalions of the 39th Infantry here, and 1 of the 39th Infantry here, and the engineers here. Okay, so next up, the final piece in this puzzle for this first turn is I am going to try and do an armoured thrust down the centre here. We've got a victory objective here, 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 and here, and there's another one further up the peninsula up there. And so I'm going to try and really push through here first of all, if I can get to this point, and then would like to cut across here. And I'm suspecting there's going to be a bunch of units in this area because of all these fortifications. So if I can cut them off, get them out of supply, let them soak for a few turns so their supply level drops off, and therefore their defense rating will plummet. And then I can just do some nice mopping up without exhausting my troops. So I'm going to bring the 89th up, and yeah, the auto plotting is not doing a good job, so I'm actually going to do tactical movement, and I'm going to come through here. Now my hope is that there aren't any German units here, but we shall see. As I'm doing tactical movement, I won't be ambushed anyway. So I'm going to move that up there. I'm going to move the 60th 1st Battalion there, 2nd Battalion. Oh, can they not? How about if I go this way? Yeah, they can get a bit closer by going that way. Okay, and the last one is there. That will not do. Oh, it will do. Yes, sorry. I was thinking about trying to move it into there, but again, if there's an enemy unit here, I could be ambushed. So I'm going to stick with the tactical movement, and I'll be able to move them down more quickly afterwards. Now, I can't really remember whether I've moved everything and whether I've got them all exactly moved to where I want them to be. So a really useful thing in V for Victory here, because this isn't a turn-by-turn game, it isn't a I go, you go game. This is a simultaneous execution or simultaneous turn game, where also known as a we go, where everything is done simultaneously. So I can't really remember, you won't see where these go until I actually go into the execution phase. So what I can do is go to show planned moves, and this shows me where the units would be if they don't find any enemy and get stopped by any zones of control, or they don't get ambushed or whatever. Now, are they where I want them to be? So the 47th will be ready to attack the next turn. The 39th, I can move into position the turn after, and then I can start moving these rest of the units down in the central area here as necessary. So that looks good. So the only other thing I haven't done is assign any artillery. Now, I'm kind of debating about whether I want to do any artillery attacks, because every time you use an artillery piece for an attack, the fatigue level of that unit climbs, I think it's about 2 points each time you use it. On a daylight turn, that is. And the thing is, for each point of fatigue, you lose 3.3% of your barrage strength. So for each, as you lose 2 every time you use them on a daylight turn, you lose nearly 7% of your barrage strength in the process. So the next time you want to use it, you're 7% weaker. And that builds up, I tell you, very quickly, that fatigue and the reduction in the barrage strength. So I may just conserve these units for the next turn. Now, I know these regiments are very strong relative to these fortified positions, so I don't think I'd waste any artillery kind of doing soak-off attacks on these to try and soften them up. They don't really need softened up. This unit here, though, is dug in. That shows like a little fortification state, so that just means it's dug in, and the ×2 means its defense strength is doubled. There are 2 units in there. I have no idea what they are, what type of units, what size, what strength. So I think it would be judicious to do some soak-off attacks on that, and I think I'm going to use just some of the lower range artillery first. So we'll just do an attack there, and you can see it kind of guesstimates some odds here, and the red light has come on there to indicate that I don't really have any intelligence on the units I'm attacking. So it's telling me that this odds number that it's displaying is very much a guesstimate, and if I keep clicking on the enemy unit, you'll see that being re-estimated and changing, and you can see it's moving all over the place. And so as you can see there, sometimes the odds could be almost down at 1 to 1, they could be up at 8 to 1, I just have no clue. So I will actually probably assign a few more artillery strikes. We've got a couple of artillery pieces here that have a barrage strength of 7, and this is key to smash our way through here. So I'm going to assign our 2 strongest artillery pieces there, and I'm going to leave some of the others unused so that we have full strength for the next turn. And I think I'm going to leave that at that. Yeah, it's going to do some decent damage to them, I think. Okay, so I think that's about it. Let's finally actually go ahead and do something in the game. So we're going to go to the phase and select execution. We'll see what happens. Now I made a really big mistake there. I keep forgetting this. You can see that there's only one hex has been highlighted, and this is we're now in the after action phase, and it's normally these have a red border around them if it is a normal combat attack. If it's purple, as is shown here, then it has been resolved as an interdiction attack. And if I click on it, it says here, as it says, American interdiction attack, traffic was not affected. So traffic in terms of this meaning supply traffic. Now the reason my artillery strikes on that hex were resolved as interdiction and not as a combat attack is because there were none of my units were next to the enemy unit at the time of the artillery strike. And that's something you've really got to remember in this game, and I really need to try and remember it myself because I keep forgetting. Now I believe that was changed from the very first versions of Utah Beach because kind of one of the cheats was that once the enemy's HQ had been identified, you would literally just hammer it with artillery and destroy it, and therefore all of the associated or attached units would go out of supply, and they would be easy to therefore destroy subsequently. So Atomic Games changed the rules such that artillery strikes on those units that aren't part of the front line, aren't next to another enemy unit, that they would be resolved as interdiction. So I made a mistake. We'll go to the planning stage now for the next turn. If we go back to the general, we can see we're now on the 10 AM game turn. Now we click on the calendar, you can see it's now highlighted, and we have air power available. Fantastic. Well folks, I think we'll stop there for this episode. I do hope that my explanations have been useful and that you've enjoyed this video. Now that I've covered most of the basics, the next episode will include a lot more action as we move up the capital of Hague to destroy the enemy and capture victory locations. Please remember to like this video as this really helps me out, and please subscribe. Take care for now. Thank you very much. Bye bye.